In the gentle glow of a Brooklyn street lamp in the early 1940s, a young man named Steve Rogers lies awake in a narrow bed. The night air is cool and still, carrying the distant sounds of jazz from a radio in a neighboring apartment. Steve's small room is modest and quiet, cracked wallpaper, a threadbare rug, and on the wall, a faded photograph of his parents who left this world too soon. Despite the late hour, his blue eyes remain open, gazing up at the plaster ceiling. Outside, the city hums softly, but Steve's mind is far away, filled with dreams of a world at war and his earnest desire to help. He is slight and frail, with a litany of medical conditions that have kept him out of the army. But his heart, oh, his heart is brave and determined. As he listens to a muffled radio broadcast describing the battles raging in Europe, Steve gently presses a hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat of a courageous spirit in a weak body. He draws a slow, deep breath, determined that somehow, in some way, he will find a way to serve and protect. Steve Rogers grew up on these Brooklyn streets, a scrappy kid with asthma, prone to illness, yet always standing up for what was right. Even as a child, he couldn't ignore a bully or an injustice. The memory drifts into his mind like a scene from a distant life. A younger Steve, undersized and skinny, in a back alley one afternoon. The sun was setting, painting the brick walls in long shadows. A couple of bigger boys had cornered another kid. Without hesitating, Steve stepped in, voice shaking but resolute, telling them to pick on someone their own size, though he was hardly anyone's size. The confrontation left Steve bruised and on the ground in that alley, fists raised in defiance, even as his lip bled. "I can do this all day," he whispered to himself, stubbornly pushing back to his feet once more, ready to continue the fight, despite the pain. It wasn't bravado. It was a quiet promise he made to never give up, no matter how many times life knocked him down. Even at that tender age, Steve's courage outshone his small stature. His best friend, James Bucky Barnes, often came to his rescue in those days, a taller, stronger kid with a charming grin and protective instincts. Bucky grew up a few blocks away, and their friendship was as steady as the ticking of a clock. In the peaceful darkness of his room, Steve recalls a warm summer evening on the Brooklyn sidewalk, streetlights flickering to life. He and Bucky were maybe 12, sitting on a stoop after a scuffle with some local bullies. Bucky draped an arm around Steve's shoulders as they shared a bottle of cream soda, the bubbles tickling their noses. "You've got to run away from fights you can't win, pal," Bucky had advised gently, but Steve only shook his head, bruises already purpling on his cheek. "If you run, they'll never learn," he replied softly. Even then, Steve's moral compass pointed true north. He simply couldn't turn away when someone needed help, even if he was outmatched. Bucky sighed and gave a small, affectionate laugh, ruffling Steve's sandy blonde hair. "I'm with you till the end of the line, pal," Bucky promised with a grin, not realizing how those words would echo through their lives in the years to come. As time flows onward like a gentle river, Steve and Bucky grow up in the shadow of the Great Depression and the looming Second World War. By 1942, the world is fully embroiled in conflict. Steve is now a young man in his early 20s, still slight at barely over 5.5 feet tall and weighing next to nothing, with large earnest eyes magnified by a pair of round-rimmed glasses. He's been orphaned since his late teens. His father Joseph had been a soldier in the 107th Infantry during the First World War and died from mustard gas exposure before Steve was even born. His mother Sarah served as a nurse and raised Steve alone, instilling in him compassion and bravery before she herself passed away when Steve was still a young man. These losses could have hardened some hearts, But in Steve they fostered even more empathy and determination. He carries their memory gently, as if guiding him, encouraging him to be the good man they believed he could be. Now the country is at war once more. Steve yearns with every fiber of his being to enlist in the army and follow in his father's footsteps, not out of a lust for battle, but from a sincere desire to stand up for others and do his part. It's a crisp spring morning in 1943. The recruiting station in Brooklyn smells of old wood and paper, a dust mote-filled sunbeam slanting through the window, as Steve sits patiently on a bench, clutching another enlistment form. He's attempted to enlist multiple times in multiple cities, even falsifying his information on forms, changing his birthplace, altering dates, in a desperate attempt to slip through the cracks of the strict enlistment requirements. At every turn he's been classified as 4F, unfit for service due to his myriad of health issues: asthma, scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, high blood pressure, heart troubles, weight, height, eyesight. The list goes on. Still, he persists. In the subdued quiet of the recruitment office, Steve's foot taps anxiously. The military doctor reviewing his file furrows his brow, confusion and disbelief crossing his face. "Son, you've already been declared unfit for service. Multiple times," the doctor says, trying to be gentle but firm. Steve's heart sinks a little, but he sets his jaw in quiet determination. "I know," he replies softly, "but I'm not going to stop trying. I know I'm meant to do more than sit on the sidelines." The doctor gives him a long look, noticing the sincerity in Steve's eyes. Out of curiosity, he asks, "Your form says your father served in the 107th. Steve nods, a touch of pride warming his voice. "Yes, sir. He gave his life in the First War. Mustard gas," he adds quietly. "So, ball." There's a brief silence, an acknowledgement of sacrifice, before the doctor regretfully stamps Steve's form. Rejected, yet again. The only sounds in the room are the soft thud of the stamp and the rustle of paper. Steve swallows hard, nods in polite acceptance, despite the disappointment that pricks at his heart like needles. He thanks the doctor for his time and steps out into the morning light. Outside, the city bustles with activity. Cars rumbling by, pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks, with newspapers tucked under arms, and the distant clatter of a streetcar on its tracks. Steve squints against the bright sun, adjusting to the world outside the dim office. He takes a slow breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs, trying to release the sting of another rejection. Standing on the sidewalk, slender shoulders slightly slumped, he looks down at his enlistment papers stamped in red. Before he can dwell too long, a familiar arm slips around his neck in a playful headlock. "Thought I'd find you here," comes Bucky's warm voice, teasing. Steve hadn't noticed Bucky approach. Bucky Barnes, now in his army sergeant's uniform, looks dashing and confident, the very picture of the ideal soldier that Steve wishes he could be. Steve musters a smile and shrugs off the headlock as Bucky releases him. "Any luck this time?" Bucky asks, though he can read the answer in Steve's eyes. Steve shakes his head, trying to brush it off lightly. "There's gotta be a way. I'm not going to quit." His tone is soft but resolved. Bucky sighs and claps a hand on Steve's shoulder as they start walking down the busy Brooklyn street together. The city around them is alive with energy, but their pace is unhurried. Two friends lost in conversation. "You know, you're kind of missing the point of a rain check, right?" Bucky jokes, a lopsided smile on his face. Steve glances at him, puzzled. "Rain check?" Bucky chuckles. "This is your 5th try, pal. Sometimes you gotta take no for an answer." They both know Steve's not built that way. Steve's cheeks flush a bit, either from embarrassment or frustration, perhaps both. "I just don't want to stay behind while everyone else is sacrificing," he murmurs, eyes drifting to a recruitment poster on a brick wall. "A stern Uncle Sam wants you to defend America. There are men risking their lives every day. I can't do anything less." Bucky stops and turns to face Steve, the din of the city fading into the background for a moment. "Steve," he says sincerely, "you're my best friend, and you're a good man. But you're 90 pounds soaking wet and asthmatic. The Army's standards, they're not personal. I worry they might be right about your health." Steve stiffens slightly. He knows Bucky is speaking out of concern and love, but it still hurts. "I can handle myself," Steve replies, a touch of that familiar stubbornness creeping into his soft voice. "I know I'm not as strong or as fast as others, but there are things I can offer. I just need one chance." His eyes glisten with emotion that he quickly blinks away. Bucky's face gentles, and he gives Steve a pat, guiding him forward again. "Come on," Bucky says with forced cheer. "There's something we need to do tonight. Stark Expo's in town. You and me, we've got dates, sort of." Steve opens his mouth to protest. He isn't exactly a hit with the ladies and he knows it, but Bucky waves it off. "Double date, and one of them's your date," he insists playfully. "Just come out, have some fun. Forget about the Army for a few hours." As evening falls, the 1943 Stark Expo lights up the night sky on the shores of New York. The fairgrounds are aglow with colorful lights, futuristic displays of technology, and pavilions playing big band music that drifts through the warm summer air. People stroll and chatter, laughter mixing with the distant whir of some experimental contraption being shown off by Howard Stark's engineers. Steve walks beside Bucky through the expo entrance, Bucky's arm linked with a pretty brunette's, while Steve shyly accompanies a red-headed young lady who smiles kindly at him. Steve's in his best suit, which is a little large on his scrawny frame, and he holds his hat in both hands, more than a little nervous. Crowds like this make him feel even smaller, but there's wonder in his eyes as he looks around at the dazzling exhibits promising the world of tomorrow. A replica of a towering cityscape, sleek automobiles of the future, even a flying car demonstration by Howard Stark himself, which sputters and fails halfway to the gasps and amusement of the audience. Steve can't help but grin softly at that. They wander through the exhibitions, and for a short while Steve manages to set aside his disappointment. Under the golden glow of hanging lights, Steve's date chats with him about the music and the exhibits. Steve is polite, listening attentively, but Bucky notices Steve's eyes keep drifting toward a different tent, one decorated in red, white, and blue, where an army recruitment station is temporarily set up for the expo crowds. Bucky's expression falls slightly. He excuses himself from his date for a moment and gently pulls Steve aside. The music from a nearby bandstand plays a romantic tune, and couples begin to dance under the stars. Bucky tilts his head, indicating the recruitment tent. "Thinking about going over there, aren't you?" he asks, though he knows the answer. Steve sighs, looking torn. "It's not that I don't appreciate this, Buck. I do. It's just, if I don't try again, I'll regret it." Bucky runs a hand through his own neatly combed hair, contemplating. "Steve," he starts carefully, "you know I leave for England in the morning. The 107th ship's out. If I could have you with me, I would. But I can't." There's pain in both of their eyes now, the thought of parting, of Bucky going to war without Steve by his side. It frightens them both in ways they don't speak aloud. Steve forces a smile. Who am I gonna have to rescue me if you're gone? He tries to joke, echoing all the times Bucky bailed him out of trouble in their youth. I'm always in your corner, pal, Bucky replies softly. He looks at the recruitment tent and then back at Steve. After a pause, he sighs in resignation. Just be careful. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. Steve half smiles with a faint quiver in his voice. How can I? You're taking all the stupid with you. They both chuckle quietly, an old joke between them easing the tension. Bucky pulls Steve into a quick brotherly hug, a strong arm around his neck, and a brief squeeze. But seriously, Steve, Bucky adds in a lower voice as he pulls back and grips Steve's shoulder firmly. Maybe this is your chance. That fella over there running the enlistment. Just talk to him. Can't hurt, right? Steve nods, hope flickering in his chest once more. With Bucky covering for him with the dates, Steve slips away into the recruitment tent. The atmosphere inside is markedly different from the festive fairgrounds, quieter, more earnest. Patriotic posters line the canvas walls, and an American flag hangs behind a simple wooden desk. There aren't many potential recruits at this hour, just a couple of young men filling out forms. Steve approaches the solitary Army Dr. Psy examiner on duty, who raises an eyebrow at him. Steve clears his throat and politely asks for another enlistment form. The doctor, a kindly-looking older man with spectacles perched on his nose, eyes Steve's thin frame skeptically, but hands him the form. Steve sits on a bench, the sounds of distant music muffled through the tent's fabric. His heart is pounding as he fills out the form once again, using yet another false address to circumvent the system's record of his previous attempts. The pen in his hand trembles slightly, but he writes as neatly as he can. A voice breaks the silence. You're really going to do this again? It's not the doctor. The voice is accented, German perhaps, but gentle. Steve looks up to see an older man standing a few feet away, watching him with keen eyes. The man has a warm, understanding smile and introduces himself as Dr. Abraham Erskine. Steve hadn't noticed him inside the tent, but clearly Dr. Erskine has been observing. Steve stands politely and nods, not sure what to say at first. Yes, sir, he finally replies softly. I'll keep trying however long it takes. There's a calm sincerity in his tone that makes Erskine's smile widen. The doctor, examining forms at the desk, has now noticed Erskine and snaps to attention, clearly recognizing him as someone important with the army. Erskine nods to the doctor, then turns back to Steve. His eyes twinkle kindly behind small round glasses. Tell me, son, Erskine asks quietly, so as not to embarrass Steve in front of the others. Do you want to kill Nazis? Steve, taken aback by the blunt question, shakes his head a little. I don't want to kill anyone, he answers truthfully. I just don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from. His words are plain but spoken from the heart, containing none of the bravado or bloodlust that some might express. It's a simple statement of principle. Dr. Erskine appraises Steve for a moment in the hush of that small tent, hearing the sincerity and conviction in the young man's voice. Outside, fireworks suddenly crackle in the sky above the fair, casting fleeting, colorful lights through the tent's opening. Erskine glances at Steve's partially filled form and sees the multiple scratched-out prior entries, understanding immediately what they imply. With a gentle nod, Erskine places a hand on Steve's shoulder. Congratulations, soldier, he says softly, startling Steve. You've just been drafted. Steve's heart skips. Is this real? Did he hear right? The examining doctor stands up in surprise, and Erskine simply gives him a knowing look and a subtle nod. "We'll take him," Erskine affirms quietly. Steve can scarcely believe it. A broad smile forms on his face, eyes shining with gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you. Thank you, sir," he exclaims under his breath. Not wanting to disturb the relative quiet, Erskine just pats his shoulder. "We'll do great things together, Mr. Rogers," he assures in a grandfatherly tone. That night, Steve leaves the expo not with Bucky and the girls, but with a new purpose. Bucky and his dates saw Steve speaking with the strange doctor and then being led away towards an army car. Bucky, initially alarmed at seeing Steve whisked off, caught Steve's eye just in time for Steve to give a tiny wave and an excited grin. Bucky returned a proud salute in jest, understanding that somehow Steve finally got his chance. As Steve sits in the back of the army vehicle next to Dr. Erskine, being driven to a secret recruitment facility, he gazes out at the dark New York skyline and the twinkling expo lights receding behind him. Everything feels surreal and sudden. Erskine breaks the silence gently, asking Steve about himself, and Steve speaks in a soft voice about growing up in Brooklyn, about losing his parents, about Bucky, about why he wants to help fight this war. There's no bitterness as he speaks, only hope and earnest resolve. Erskine listens intently, occasionally offering a kind word or chuckle. The drive is not too long, and soon they arrive at a hidden training site, Camp Leahy, New Jersey, though Steve doesn't know its name yet. In the darkness, under the veil of night, Steve finds himself in an army training camp where a select group of recruits are gathered. He steps out of the car and is immediately greeted by a brisk, no-nonsense military man, Colonel Chester Phillips, and a poised British officer, Agent Peggy Carter, of the Strategic Scientific Reserve. The night air is filled with the chirp of crickets, and barracks lights cast a warm glow on the parade ground. Steve stands straight, trying to make himself appear taller and stronger as the colonel sizes him up. Colonel Phillips seems skeptical of this scrawny volunteer that Erskine has brought, and he makes a few curt comments about Steve's slight build. But Peggy Carter offers Steve a polite smile, and her eyes hold a spark of encouragement. Steve notices immediately how composed and confident she is. Dark hair neatly pinned, a smart uniform, and an air of competence. She introduces herself in a clipped British accent, Agent Carter, extending a hand which Steve shakes, careful to be gentle. There's a subtle kindness in her firm handshake. For a moment Steve forgets how out of place he might seem here, and just feels grateful. The colonel quickly barks orders, and Steve is shown to a bunk. Tomorrow, training begins before dawn. That first night at camp, Steve lies on a firm bunk bed, staring at the wooden beams of the barrack ceiling. The other recruits, all taller, broader, more traditionally fit men, are snoring or whispering amongst themselves. Steve's muscles are a little tense with anticipation. His entire life, he has been told he was too weak, too sickly. Tomorrow, he'll have to prove that heart matters more than height, that courage can trump capacity. The thought is both thrilling and nerve-wracking. With a slow exhale, Steve calms himself. He recalls Dr. Erskine's gentle words during the ride. "Whatever happens tomorrow, promise me one thing, that you will stay who you are. Not a perfect soldier, but a good man." Steve holds on to that advice like a lifeline. He silently vows to himself to remain good, to remain true, no matter what comes. Outside, the night deepens, and Steve finally drifts into a light sleep. The frogs and crickets of the countryside, singing a lullaby, that carries him into dawn. Morning breaks with a sharp whistle and calls for assembly. The sun is barely cresting the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, as Steve scrambles out of bed to join the other recruits. Training is grueling. Obstacle courses, climbing, running, drills, and Steve struggles. He's always at the back of the pack, panting hard, sweat soaking through his ill-fitting army shirt. The other men are faster, stronger, but Steve has one advantage: he simply won't quit. Through every climb where his arms tremble, through every run where his lungs burn, he perseveres. The instructors shout, and sometimes the other recruits snicker at his efforts, but Steve steels himself and continues. Agent Carter and Dr. Erskine observe quietly from the sidelines, evaluating the candidates for the special program. Colonel Phillips, arms crossed, often gives a dubious shake of his head when Steve finishes last, but he cannot ignore that Steve never yields. In one exercise, the colonel tosses a dummy grenade into the midst of the recruits as a test, hollering, "Grenade." Without a second thought, Steve yells, "Get back," and hurls himself on the grenade, curling his small body over it to shield others, while the rest scatter for cover. He lies there waiting for the blast, which never comes. It was, of course, a fake grenade. Slowly, Steve lifts his head to the astonished faces of the other recruits. Colonel Phillips, initially speechless, finally barks, "It's a dummy grenade." All clear. As Steve dusts himself off, a few of the men look at him with new respect. Peggy Carter's gaze in particular holds admiration and a bit of concern that he so willingly risked himself. Steve, embarrassed by the attention, simply mumbles something about instinct and checks that everyone is okay. In that moment, any doubt about Steve's bravery vanishes. Dr. Erskine meets Steve's eyes from across the yard and gives a reassuring nod, as if to say this is why he was chosen. Days pass in a blur of drills and tests. Despite his physical shortcomings, Steve endears himself to those paying attention with his unwavering spirit, compassion for his fellow trainees, and a humble attitude. In the evenings, he sometimes finds a quiet corner in the barracks to sketch in a little notebook he carries, simple drawings that help him unwind and reflect. One dusk, as the sky turns violet, Peggy Carter walks by and notices Steve sitting on the steps of the barracks, pencil in hand. She pauses, curiosity piqued. "What are you sketching?" she asks softly, not wanting to startle him. Steve straightens up, a bit self-conscious, and shows her the page. It's a surprisingly adept sketch of the flagpole and yard, with a couple of the other soldiers in the distance, doing exercises, drawn with a light, careful touch. "Just whatever comes to mind," he says, shyly. Peggy smiles, impressed. "You have a talent," she remarks. Steve shrugs with a modest grin. "It passes the time. Helps me think." There's a comfortable quiet as Peggy sits for a moment on the step beside him. Crickets have begun their nightly chorus. "You did a brave thing back there with the grenade," she says eventually, voice low. Steve shakes his head. "Any one of those guys would have done the same." Peggy tilts her head, knowing that's not true. None of them moved except Steve, but she doesn't argue. Instead, she inquires gently, "Your friend, Barnes, was it? The one shipping out?" Steve's eyes soften at the mention of Bucky. "Yes, Bucky. He's like a brother to me. He's probably in England by now, with the 107th. Peggy hears the worry in his tone that he tries to mask. "We're going to try to win this war quickly, Mr. Rogers. If this project succeeds, perhaps we can bring soldiers like your friend back home sooner." Steve nods, hope and determination flickering across his face. "That's all I want," he murmurs. They sit a while longer, under the twilight sky, two very different people, united by a common purpose. Finally, the day comes. Erskine's Super Soldier project has selected Steve. He will be the one to undergo the experimental serum procedure. The morning of the procedure is calm and clear. Steve wakes up earlier than usual, nerves dancing in his stomach. He dresses in the clean white undershirt and slacks provided to him, and is driven with Agent Carter and Dr. Erskine to a secret facility in Brooklyn. The ride in the car is quiet, aside from a few reassurances. Peggy, seated next to Steve, offers him a gentle smile when their eyes meet. Erskine hums an old tune softly, perhaps to ease Steve's tension. They arrive at an antique shop storefront, which hides an elevator down to a hidden SSR laboratory. As they descend, the lights dim and a hush envelops them. Steve steps out into an underground lab, buzzing with low conversation and equipment hum. A few politicians and officers are present to observe this big moment, including Senator Brandt and Colonel Phillips. Howard Stark is there too, preparing the machinery. Steve is guided to the center of the room where a cylindrical pod-like chamber stands open, ready for him. His heart beats faster as he climbs inside. Peggy stands by, watching intently, and Dr. Erskine gives Steve an encouraging nod. "How are you feeling, Mr. Rogers?" Erskine asks gently. Steve musters a tight smile. "A little nervous, sir, but ready." Erskine places a hand on the pod's rim. "No matter what happens, Steve, you've made me very proud." Steve swallows hard, gratitude welling up. "Thank you, Doctor. I won't let you down." With that, they secure him into place. Technicians on the upper level start the procedure. Steve feels a series of pinpricks as multiple needles inject the serum into his muscles. He clenches his jaw. It stings, but he doesn't cry out. Then Howard Stark activates the Vita Ray chamber, and bright light floods Steve's world. Searing energy courses through him. His nerves feel aflame. Steve groans despite trying not to. Peggy unconsciously takes a step forward, concern etched on her face. Erskine monitors, calling out to push forward, even as Steve screams once in agony. It's a disconcerting scene, the pain evident, Steve's small form convulsing slightly under the strain. "Do you want to stop?" someone calls out. Through gritted teeth, Steve forces the words, "No, I can do this. I'm fine," echoing his lifelong mantra of endurance. At last, it's over. The chamber opens with a hiss of steam. Everyone leans in, silent with anticipation. Peggy's hand is over her mouth, in worry. Steve, who had been diminutive when he entered, emerges transformed. He steps out slowly, breathing hard but steady. He's taller by several inches, now towering over the previously taller Peggy. His once scrawny arms and chest are now broad and muscular, his physique a peak of human perfection. Steve himself looks down at his body in astonishment and touches his own abdomen and arms, as if to make sure this is real. "How do you feel?" Peggy asks softly, eyes wide. Steve meets her gaze in that moment. The vulnerability in his eyes is still the same. Steve she's come to admire. "Taller," he says breathily, with a hint of a laugh. Peggy can't help but laugh softly in relief. Her cheeks flush slightly as she realizes she's been staring at his bare chest, and quickly averts her eyes politely. The observers are clapping and cheering now, a few slaps on Colonel Phillips' back as they celebrate the experiment's success. In the midst of this triumphant moment, a sudden sharp crack of gunfire shatters the air. The celebration screeches to a halt, replaced by shouting. Steve whips his head around to see Dr. Erskine stagger, a red stain spreading on his shirt. He's been shot by an infiltrating dry agent posing as one of the observers. Chaos erupts. The shooter grabs one of the last remaining serum vials and flees. "Stop him," someone yells. Without thinking, Steve sprints out of the chamber, surprising himself with his own speed. Around him, the scene is frenzied. Peggy draws her pistol and chases the assassin up the stairs onto the Brooklyn street, while agents scramble. Steve rushes to Erskine's side for a heartbeat. The doctor is lying on the ground, gasping. Steve kneels, gentle hands trying to stanch the bleeding, but it's clearly fatal. Dr. Erskine's eyes find Steve's. With the last of his strength, Erskine reaches up and touches Steve's chest, right over his heart, in a wordless reminder of his advice: "Stay a good man." Steve's eyes blur with tears as he nods. "I will, I promise." Erskine gives a faint approving smile, then the light fades from his eyes. There's no time to fully grieve. Steve hears an engine rev outside and realizes the assassin is escaping in a car. Fueled by determination and a surge of righteous anger at the loss of Erskine, Steve takes off in pursuit. Bursting out of the antique shop onto the street, the sunlight and noise hit him. For a moment he's disoriented. He's never run so fast, never seen the world in such crisp clarity, his poor eyesight now cured. He spots Peggy up ahead on the road, taking a shot at the getaway car, hitting the agent who stumbles. The car crashes, and the dry agent flees on foot, heading toward the docks. Steve dashes forward, feet pounding the pavement, gaining on the man with leaps that cover yards at a time. New sensations flood. Steve, the power in his legs, the wind rushing in his ears, the ease with which he can breathe. But he remains focused. The chase leads into a busy street market. Steve leaps over fruit, stands with agility, carefully sidestepping civilians with an acrobat's grace, apologizing breathlessly whenever he topples something, still polite even in his urgency. People gape at the shirtless, newly muscular man racing past them like an Olympian. At the docks, the dry agent climbs into a small submarine pod to escape. In an extraordinary feat, Steve dives into the water and pries open the metal hatch with his bare hands, pulling the surprised agent out. They grapple for a moment, Steve still learning his strength, but he manages to subdue the man. Panting, Steve hauls him back onto the dock where Peggy and other agents arrive. Seeing he's cornered, the dry operative snarls something about Heil Hydra and commits suicide with a cyanide capsule cleverly hidden in a tooth. Steve grimaces, frustrated to lose the chance for information. Water dripping from his heroic frame, he stands on the dock, catching his breath as the others arrive. Peggy approaches, relief evident in her eyes that Steve is all right. She drapes a jacket over his shoulders gently, both to warm him and to cover his bare torso in public, her touch lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Well done," she says softly. Steve nods, though the victory feels hollow. Erskine is gone, and with him the only hope of reproducing the super soldier serum. Steve realizes with a heavy heart that he may now truly be one of a kind, the first and last of his kind. The days following are a mix of accolades and frustration for Steve. The army doesn't quite know what to do with him. Colonel Phillips sees a soldier, but the brass in Washington sees a propaganda tool. With Erskine's project shuttered and no new super soldiers to create, a senator proposes Steve be used to raise morale and funds. Before he knows it, Steve is donning a colorful costume, a suit patterned after the American flag, complete with red boots and a blue helmet adorned with a white A. It's not the role he envisioned, but Steve, ever dutiful, goes along with it, hoping it may yet serve the greater good. Thus, Captain America is born, initially not on the battlefield, but on stages across America. It's a strange time for Steve. He travels from city to city, performing in front of crowds, scripted lines, punching out a man in a padded Hitler mask for laughs, and encouraging people to buy war bonds. The USO dancers behind him twirl in sequined outfits as music blares and crowds cheer. Under the spotlights, Steve smiles and salutes, playing the part, but inside he often feels embarrassed and restless. He who yearned to fight alongside real soldiers is now selling comic books with his own cartoonish face on the cover. During one show, in front of a roaring crowd of civilians, Steve forgets a line momentarily, and the audience laughs, thinking it part of the act. He blushes, recovering with a jovial, "I'm just a kid from Brooklyn," that sends the crowd into applause. He's become a symbol, but he fears he's becoming a joke. At night, in lonely hotel rooms on tour, he sketches in his notebook drawings of the stage, of his gaudy costume, sometimes adding a small figure of himself in the corner, tiny among large lights. One drawing, crumpled up, depicted him as a monkey dancing on stage, a reflection of how used he feels. Yet he endures, telling himself that every bond sold helps someone. After some months of touring the States, Steve is sent overseas to Italy to perform for active troops. The atmosphere changes. Performing for tired, wounded soldiers is far different from entertaining wide-eyed families back home. One evening, on a muddy camp stage not far from the front lines, Steve's doing his routine, the dancers kicking in unison behind him, but the soldiers are silent, their faces blank or confused. They've lost friends in battle, they're exhausted, and here's this bright-colored character asking them to laugh and cheer. Someone boos, a few others join in. One even throws a tomato that splatters against the stage near Steve's big red boot. Steve flushes with shame under his mask, feeling utterly out of place. He fumbles through the rest of his act to polite, thin applause and quickly exits the stage. Back in his tent, he sits with his head in his hands, feeling the weight of inadequacy and humiliation. This isn't what he was meant to do. He's Captain America in name, but he hasn't saved a single soul out here. As he's steeped in those low thoughts, a figure appears at the tent flap. Peggy Carter. She's dressed in her military uniform, eyes alight with urgency. "Steve, you need to come with me," she says without any preamble. Steve looks up, surprised to see her here in Italy, and even more surprised at her tone. She explains quickly. Bucky's unit, the 107th Infantry, was in a battle nearby, and many of the men, including Bucky, are missing or captured. The Army's initial reports list them as MIA or killed. Steve's heart lurches painfully. Bucky, his best friend, his lifelong companion, in enemy hands, or worse. Steve's hands shake as he stands, pulling off his cowl and discarding the gaudy Captain America shield, used for stage theatrics, just painted metal, nothing special. "Where are they?" is all he manages to ask. Peggy informs him that reconnaissance spotted a hate trader facility behind enemy lines where the prisoners might be held, but the brass has deemed a rescue too risky. They plan no immediate action. Steve feels anger and determination rising like a fire inside him. Those are American soldiers, his friend, left to die. How can he do nothing? Within the hour, under the cover of darkness and against orders, Steve, still clad partially in his suit. It's all he has, though he ditches the cape and any extraneous pieces, sneaks onto a plane piloted by none other than Howard Stark. Peggy has coordinated this daring, unauthorized mission, unable to just sit by either. The plane ride is tense, yet oddly invigorating for Steve. As the wind whips through the open side door of the small aircraft, Steve checks a borrowed gear belt and parachute. The Italian countryside sprawls beneath, in shades of midnight blue and black. In the distance, occasional artillery flashes light up the horizon. Howard flies low and fast. When they near the suspected Hydra base, Steve prepares to jump. Peggy, standing by the door in the rushing wind, looks at him with both worry and admiration. For a moment, neither speaks. Words would be lost in the noise anyway. Instead, Peggy reaches out and gently touches Steve's hand, a silent, "Be careful." Steve gives her a reassuring nod and a determined smile. Then he leaps from the plane into the night. The parachute drop behind enemy lines is harrowing but brief. Steve lands with a grunt on the rocky ground a few miles from the Hydra facility. He sheds his parachute and stealthily approaches. The Hydra base looms out of the darkness, all steel and concrete set into a mountain, guarded by watchtowers. Steve takes a moment to steady his breathing. This is his first real mission, alone in the dark, with men's lives at stake. It's frightening, but he feels more alive than ever. Every sense is sharp, every movement confident in his enhanced body. Moving like a shadow, he dispatches a lone guard silently and slips inside the base. Within, the corridors are dim, lit by an eerie green glow from machinery. Steve creeps along, heart pounding but mind focused. He can hear distant sounds of machinery and occasionally muffled voices. Hiding behind crates, he overhears a couple of Hydra soldiers discussing Zola and the energy source. He doesn't understand it all, but none of that matters right now. He is singularly focused on finding the prisoners. At last, he comes upon a series of cells through a small grated window in one heavy door. Steve's eyes widen as he sees dozens of men huddled inside, Allied soldiers captured in recent battles. They look weak, but their eyes widen at the sight of this mysterious costumed figure appearing. Steve quickly motions for silence, and then, using strength he hardly has gotten used to, he rips the metal door off its hinges. The prisoners blink in astonishment as the door clangs to the ground. Steve steps in softly. "It's okay, I'm here to get you out." Some recognize him, maybe from a silly USO poster, and murmur, "Captain America," half in disbelief. Steve calls a weak voice from the back. Steve's chest tightens as he sees Bucky Barnes leaning on a wall, alive but pallid and battered. In a few strides, Steve is at his side, easing Bucky's arm over his shoulders for support. "I thought you were dead," Steve whispers, emotion thick in his voice. Bucky, disoriented but managing a faint grin, "I thought you were smaller." Despite the direness, Steve lets out a soft chuckle, eyes watering as he helps Bucky stand. "I joined the army," Steve quips quietly. "Did you rescue me?" Bucky asks incredulously. Steve smiles. "I guess I did." It's a warm, miraculous moment between friends, happening in the cold, stark cell of a Hydra base. There's no time to waste. With Bucky leaning on him and the other prisoners mustering their strength, they begin their escape. Steve arms a few with weapons taken from Hydra guards he encountered, and their numbers grow as they free more cells. A ragtag platoon forms behind Steve. The facility comes alive with alarms, red lights flashing, sirens wailing, as Hydra forces realize their prisoners are escaping. A frantic running battle ensues through the corridors. The soldiers following Steve exchange gunfire with Hydra troops. Steve leads the way, shielding Bucky and others with his body when needed, using his enhanced reflexes to dodge bullets and his strength to smash through obstacles. At one point, they are pinned down by machine gun fire in a hallway. Steve spots a heavy metal door that has fallen, likely from another cell, and quickly grabs it, using it as an impromptu shield. It's not the iconic shield he will later carry, but at this moment it serves well. Holding it in front of him, he charges down the hall, deflecting bullets. The soldiers behind him follow in his wake, taking out the Hydra gunner as Steve slams the door shield into the weapon, knocking the Hydra soldier aside. Flames and chaos erupt as parts of the base are sabotaged by escaping prisoners. Amidst the din, Steve glimpses what must be the heart of this facility, a lab filled with ominous blue light, where a tall, severe-looking man in a black coat, Johann Schmidt, glowers at the intruders. Schmidt, the Hydra leader, locks eyes with Steve for a brief moment. There's an eerie calm as Schmidt removes his human disguise, revealing a ghastly red skull for a face, the result of a flawed earlier super soldier experiment. Steve's eyes widen, but he has no time to confront Schmidt. Explosions rock the base as the villain makes his escape in the confusion. Steve focuses on getting the men out alive. Under Steve's guidance, the prisoners find the exit and stream out into the night, scattering to avoid pursuit. Steve helps Bucky through the dark forest outside the base until they are safely away from the compound, which is now engulfed in flames from self-destructing machinery. Eventually, they intersect Allied lines and are met with astonishment by other American troops. Steve Rogers, who a day ago was doing stage shows, has just accomplished a miraculous rescue of over 400 men. Colonel Phillips and Peggy Carter arrive by caravan to the rendezvous point to find Steve, soot-covered and exhausted, but triumphant, surrounded by cheering soldiers he saved. Bucky is loaded onto a truck for medical care. Before he's taken away, he grips Steve's hand firmly, a silent thank you and an expression of pride in his friend. Steve stands amid the crowd, the night sky above speckled with stars, and for once he feels not out of place, but right where he should be. In the aftermath, Colonel Phillips cannot reprimand Steve for disobeying orders. The results are too great. Instead, Steve is officially promoted and truly given the mantle of Captain America, not just as a performer, but as a soldier. He's issued a proper uniform, functional yet bearing the flag's colors, and most notably, Howard Stark presents him with a special shield. It's a disc of vibranium, light and nearly indestructible, colored in rings of red and white, with a star at the center. When Steve first holds the shield on his arm, it feels like an extension of himself, as natural as raising his own hand. He practices with it, amazed by how the vibranium absorbs impacts. Peggy playfully fires a few rounds at him in a demonstration, and Steve instinctively blocks them with ease, the bullets pinging off into the dirt. "I think it suits you," Peggy remarks with a proud smile, as Steve marvels at the shield's perfect balance. Steve doesn't work alone. He recruits a special team from among the men he rescued, including men like Dum Dum Dugan, Gabe Jones, Jim Morita, Jack Dernier, and Montgomery Falsworth. They become fondly known as the Howling Commandos. Together, over the next months, Steve leads them on numerous missions against Hydra across Europe. This period is a tapestry of camaraderie and heroism. In a montage of gentle storytelling, we see them around campfires at night, Steve quietly cleaning his shield as the others share light-hearted banter and stories to unwind from the day's skirmish. Bucky, recovered and returned to duty, is at Steve's side for many of these missions, cracking jokes about how Steve's the star-spangled man now, but always watching Steve's back in battle. These nights are calm between storms. They toast bread over low flames, share rations, and sometimes Steve pulls out a little compass that has Peggy's photo in it, gazing at it when he thinks no one notices, the warmth of a budding affection growing in his heart. Peggy herself isn't always present on the front lines, but she and Steve exchange letters and radio calls when they can. In one quiet scene at dawn, Steve sits at a small field desk, writing by the pale light of early morning. He's drafting a letter to Peggy, thanking her for believing in him when so many others didn't, and describing a sunrise over the Italian hills that he wishes she could see. He struggles a bit with the words. He's never been eloquent with romance, but he hopes she'll understand what he can't fully articulate. He signs it simply, "Yours, Steve." He tucks the letter away to send later and glances at that compass with her picture, drawing a deep, centering breath before another mission. The war rages on, and H.R. grows more desperate as Captain America and his allies dismantle their operations one by one. Yet, tragedy is not absent from these exploits. During an operation atop a moving train through the Alps to capture H.R.'s lead scientist Dr. Arnim Zola, things go awry. Steve and Bucky, fighting side by side on the rattling train, are ambushed by H.R. soldiers wielding powerful weapons powered by the mysterious energy of the Tesseract, a glowing blue cube H.R. has been using to create advanced weaponry. In the fierce close-quarters battle, a blast tears open the side of the train car. As wind and snow whip into the compartment, Bucky fires at a H.R. soldier climbing on the outside of the train. The train jostles violently. Steve, on the other end of the car, suddenly hears Bucky cry out. He turns just in time to see Bucky losing his balance near the blown-out hole. With a look of shock, Bucky falls from the speeding train, disappearing into the white abyss of the snowy canyon below. "Bucky!" Steve's voice tears out of him, raw and panicked, echoing into the howling wind. Without hesitation, Steve leaps toward the opening, arm outstretched, but he's too late. Bucky is gone, from sight, into the darkness and ice below. Time seems to slow, as Steve stands at the gaping hole, chest heaving, eyes wide with horror. Snowflakes sting his face. The train barrels onward, and behind him the remaining howling commandos finally subdue Zola and secure the area. But Steve is numb. He drops to his knees at the edge, where his best friend vanished, peering down at the rocky gorge, which fades into darkness. There is no sign of movement, no voice calling back. Steve's heart feels as though it's been shattered and blown asunder. The grief that hits him is immeasurable. Bucky, who had been by his side through everything, is now lost. A strong hand grasps Steve's shoulder firmly, pulling him back from the brink as the train rounds another bend. It's one of his comrades, perhaps Dugan or Morita. Steve doesn't even register who, as they drag him from the opening for his own safety. Steve is in shock. He doesn't resist, but silent tears freeze on his cheeks. In the days after Bucky's fall, Steve is quieter than ever. Around the camp, the howling commandos give him space and silent solidarity in mourning. In a somber, gray morning light, Steve finds a private moment to stand at the edge of a camp, overlooking a valley in the distance. He holds Bucky's dog tags in his hand, recovered from their mission gear, thumb brushing over the stamped name Barnes, J. Peggy arrives softly at his side, having come to console him, despite her own pain at hearing the news. She doesn't speak immediately, simply standing with him, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the misty expanse of pines and mountains. "I'm sorry, Steve," she finally whispers, her voice carrying the weight of Bucky's loss. Steve's voice is low and strained. "It's my fault. I should have had him secure. I slipped." Peggy turns to him, eyes earnest. "You did everything you could. Bucky's fate wasn't your fault." Steve squeezes the tags in his fist, struggling with guilt and sorrow. Peggy gently slips her hand into his, the one holding the dog tags, and together they hold that small piece of metal, an emblem of the friend they both cared for. The wind is quiet, only the faint rustle of leaves. "He was family," Steve utters softly, voice breaking. Peggy's eyes glisten as she nods. After a pause, she speaks with gentle but firm resolve. "Honor him. Finish what you started. Stop Hedra. That's what Bucky would want, wouldn't he?" Steve knows she's right. Bucky followed Steve not for glory, but because he believed in Steve's cause and heart. With a shaky breath, Steve steadies himself. "We'll stop them, all of them," he affirms quietly, determination edging back into his tone. Peggy gives his hand a supportive squeeze before releasing it, and they share a look of mutual understanding, a promise to see this through. The final confrontation with Hedra soon arrives. Steve learns that Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, plans to use a fleet of advanced bombers to attack major cities, including New York. Hedra's last stronghold is an airfield fortress, where Schmidt is preparing to launch these devastating weapons. Steve, grief and purpose intermingling, leads a daring assault. The Howling Commandos and SSR allies mount an attack on the base. It's a large-scale battle at dusk, with gunfire and explosions echoing against the mountains. Steve infiltrates the main hangar, where the massive bomber plane, loaded with explosive ordnance powered by the Tesseract, is about to take off. As sirens blare and soldiers scramble, Steve finds Schmidt boarding the plane. They briefly clash on the runway, fists and shield against Schmidt's horrifying strength and energy weapons. But Schmidt retreats into the plane's cockpit, determined to take off. The plane roars to life, engines firing. In a burst of adrenaline, Steve sprints and leaps onto the moving plane as it lifts off, hanging on as it ascends into the clouds. Inside the plane's bay, Steve confronts Schmidt at last. The two engage in a fierce fight amidst the humming bombs designated for American cities, each bomb labeled with its target, New York, Chicago, etc. Schmidt is a formidable foe, matching Steve's enhanced strength. They trade blows, and Steve's shield clangs against metal and flesh. During the struggle, a containment unit holding the Tesseract, the glowing cosmic cube that powers the weapons, is damaged. Schmidt, in his fury, grabs the Tesseract with his bare hand. In a blinding flash of blue light, a portal of energy opens above them. Schmidt's face, the ghastly red skull, contorts as he is seemingly disintegrated or pulled into the cosmic void, vanishing with a howl of rage and light. The Tesseract then melts through the plane's hull and falls away, lost to the ocean depths below. The great threat of Schmidt is ended, but a new crisis emerges. The plane is still on course, automated and loaded with bombs set to drop, and it's heading for the United States. Steve rushes to the cockpit and desperately tries to regain control. The controls are partially damaged by the earlier fight. The plane is massive and moving too fast toward its target trajectory. Heart pounding, Steve realizes there's no safe way to land the craft without risking detonation of its deadly cargo. He's faced with an unimaginable decision. Taking a shaky breath, Steve reaches for the radio equipment. In a crackle of static, He manages to contact the SSR base. Peggy Carter's voice comes through, tense and anxious. "Steve, is that you? Are you all right?" Steve swallows hard, forcing his voice to remain calm to not alarm her too much. "I'm here," he says gently. "Schmidt's gone. The bombers. I've got the plane, but I can't land it." On the other end, Peggy and Colonel Phillips listen in dawning dread. "What are you saying?" Peggy asks, her voice tight. Steve's eyes moisten as he steadies himself for what he must do. The plane is high over the ocean now, leaving icy Arctic expanses below. "This thing is moving too fast. I'm gonna have to put it in the water," Steve says quietly. Peggy immediately protests. "There must be another way, you'll crash." Steve interjects softly. Peggy." His tone is calm, almost serene, despite the mortal danger he's in. "It's okay. This is my choice." There's a pause on the line, just the static of the radio, and both of them breathing. Peggy's voice comes through, choked with emotion. "Please don't do this. We have time. We can work something out." Steve's throat tightens. He wishes there were time. He wishes he could dance with her, see her again. "Right now I'm in the middle of nowhere," he says, trying to lighten the mood gently, though tears well in his eyes. "If I wait any longer, a lot of people are gonna die. Peggy, this is my choice." On the base end, Peggy struggles to keep composure, tears streaming down her face. The colonel respectfully turns away, giving her a moment of privacy. "I'm gonna need a rain check on that dance," Steve says, attempting a small smile as he references their unresolved dance date. A promise of normalcy they'd both held on to. Peggy's voice is barely a whisper. "All right, a week next Saturday at the Stork Club." Steve's heart aches at her words. She's trying to be brave for him, painting a picture of a future where they get that dance. "You got it," Steve replies, voice soft and full of longing. 8 o'clock on the dot. "Don't you dare be late," Peggy adds, attempting a tearful chuckle, echoing the playful banter they'd shared back when Steve first awkwardly asked her for a dance. Steve closes his eyes, picturing her there. "I still don't know how to dance," he manages, an affectionate tease. Peggy's voice breaks. "I'll show you how. Just be there." There's a profound quiet between them now. One final moment. "We've got to go, Steve," Colonel Phillips says reluctantly over the comm. "Yeah," Steve responds quietly. He musters his courage, and in a tender, almost peaceful tone, the last words he speaks into the radio are, "Peggy, I'm gonna need a rain check." She hears the unspoken goodbye in those words. Steve, her voice calls as the transmission crackles. But Steve has already guided the plane's nose downward. The massive bomber hurtles towards the Arctic ice. Inside the cockpit, Steve braces himself, holding a photo of Peggy that he'd slipped from his compass. He gazes at it one more time, a half smile of both joy and sorrow on his lips. "Right, partner," he says softly, almost imagining Peggy there with him. Then impact. The plane crashes into the ice with an explosive thud. Ice and water envelop the craft, and in an instant, everything goes white and silent. Time passes in silence. The world keeps turning. The war eventually ends with Allied victory. Steve Rogers, however, becomes a legend, the hero who sacrificed himself to save millions. Many believe Captain America perished in that crash. Howard Stark leads an expedition that recovers the lost Tesseract from the ocean floor, but they never find Steve's body. Unbeknownst to the world, Steve lies in the frozen embrace of the Arctic, in deep hibernation, perfectly preserved by the super soldier serum that prevents his body from truly dying. He is like a man asleep, encased in ice, as years turn into decades. For nearly 70 years, Steve slumbers, the world shifting and changing around him. The ice holds him in a kind of ageless stasis. While he sleeps, man lands on the moon, nations rise and fall, the noisy, chaotic 20th century marches on. In his dreams, if he dreams at all, perhaps Steve is back at that promised dance, the warm lights of the Stork Club, holding Peggy Carter close as a gentle swing melody plays. Perhaps in his subconscious, time has no meaning. One moment he was crashing into the ice, the next he's opening his eyes, and indeed, one day, Steve's eyes do open. At first he hears the steady beep of a heart monitor, the soft murmur of voices. There is warmth around him. He blinks against fluorescent lighting overhead. Disoriented, he sits up. He's in a hospital bed, wearing a white patient gown. His last memory was cold and pain. Now he's comfortable and apparently safe. An attractive nurse in a 1940 SAS-style uniform walks in, smiling gently. A radio in the corner plays a baseball game. Steve's eyes flick to it. The announcer's voice crackles something about a game that Steve distinctly remembers attending back in 1941 at Ebbets Field. He frowns. Something's off. He knows that game, knows the score, and what the announcer said next. It's playing exactly as he remembers. Suspicious and suddenly on high alert, Steve swings his legs out of bed. "Where am I?" he asks the nurse warily. The nurse steps forward with a soothing gesture. "You're in a recovery room in New York City," she says. But Steve's keen sense of something amiss only heightens. His instincts, sharpened by war, tell him this is a staged scene. Before the nurse can react, Steve bolts past her, throwing open the door to the hallway. Two men in dark suits stand guard outside. Steve dispatches them with restrained strength, careful not to hurt them too badly, just enough to get past. Alarms start blaring. He runs through a corridor that doesn't quite look like a 1940s hospital, more advanced, with strange equipment and glass panels. Bursting through an exit, Steve finds himself not in 1940s New York as expected, but in the middle of Times Square, 2011, a present-day cacophony of bright neon lights, towering digital billboards, and bustling crowds. It's nighttime, and the city that never sleeps is positively buzzing. Cars with sleek designs honk and weave through traffic. Gigantic screens show images and advertisements beyond anything Steve could have imagined. The noise is overwhelming. Engines, music, thousands of conversations, electronic chirps. Steve stands on the sidewalk in his hospital gown, turning in place with wide eyes, heart pounding. He doesn't recognize this world at all. It's like stepping onto an alien planet that just happens to have familiar landmarks. Within moments, a black car pulls up, and more agents in dark tactical gear surround Steve cautiously. From the car steps Nick Fury, the director of an elite secret organization called SHIELD. He's a tall, imposing figure with an eye patch and a long black leather coat. Yet his demeanor towards Steve is calm and understanding. The agents hold back as Fury approaches. "At ease, Captain," Fury says in a measured tone. Steve's still on edge, defensive stance ready for a fight or a flight. Fury raises his hands slightly to show he means no harm. "I'm sorry about that little show back there," he continues. "We thought it best to break it to you slowly." Steve's confusion only grows. "Break what?" he asks, voice laced with anxiety as he glances again at the glaring signs around. One advertises a new smartphone, another a film, and dozens for products he's never heard of. Fury's expression softens with sympathy. "Steve, you've been asleep for nearly 70 years." The words hit Steve like a physical blow. 70 years. It's too much to process. He tries to steady his breathing. Fury explains gently that they found him frozen in the ice, that he's in the year 2011. People on the street are beginning to stare at the odd scene. A man in old-fashioned clothing looking distressed, surrounded by agents. Steve's mind swims everyone he knew. Bucky, Peggy, they're all gone, or aged. The world moved on without him. Fury's voice becomes a low reassurance amid the sensory overload. "We're here to help you adjust." "I know it's a lot to take in." Steve nods numbly, forcing himself to focus. Though panic threatens to well up, Steve clings to his soldier's discipline. He allows Fury and the agents to escort him into the car. As they drive through the neon canyons of New York City, Steve presses his face to the window, eyes drinking in the impossible reality. Advertisements for computers, glimpses of people with handheld devices glowing in their palms, fashions and skyscrapers that defy all his expectations. It's wondrous and terrifying all at once. They take Steve to a secure SHIELD facility. Over the following days, Steve is given time to recover and begin processing this immense change. It's not easy. In a quiet, softly lit apartment provided for him, Steve flips through a notebook of historical events prepared by SHIELD. He learns that the Allies won WWED, that he became a symbol of hope, that Peggy Carter co-founded SHIELD and is still alive but elderly, living in a nursing home in London. He discovers a world that experienced the Cold War, the rise of the internet, and so much more. It's overwhelming, and at times Steve is overcome with a profound sense of displacement and loneliness. One evening, unable to sleep, he wanders into the heart of Manhattan. It's after midnight, but the city shines bright as day in places. Steve finds himself at a familiar location, the site of the old Stark Expo, now a modern park. He sits on a bench beneath a towering lead billboard. A few passers-by look curiously at this man who seems lost. But in New York, everyone has seen stranger things, so they let him be. He gazes up at the night sky beyond the light pollution, wondering if any of the stars are the same ones he recognized in the 40s. Of course they are, he realizes. The stars remain the same, even if everything else changed. There's a bittersweet comfort in that. In his pocket, he carries the compass with Peggy's photograph. He takes it out now and opens it. Her youthful face smiles up at him, the same face he fell for all those years ago. Steve's eyes well up as he softly says to the picture, "I'm here, Peg. I made it just a bit late." The city noise blurs into a background hum. In that moment, under the vast sky, Steve allows himself to grieve what he lost. A life that could have been, dances never danced, friends buried by time. He closes the compass gently, holding it close. The world has changed, and none of us can go back. All we can do is our best. He recalls Peggy's own words from a SHIELD file that included an old interview with her. And sometimes the best that we can do is to start over. Start over. That's what he must do, Steve realizes. He still has a purpose. He's still needed. Not long after, Steve gets that chance to start over with a new mission, one that will thrust him into the modern world in no uncertain terms. Nick Fury comes to him with an urgent matter, a cosmic artifact called the Tesseract. The same one Howard had recovered, though Steve didn't know its significance fully, has been stolen from a SHIELD facility by an otherworldly being named Loki. Fury is assembling a response team, an initiative called the Avengers, to deal with threats beyond normal human capability. He asks Steve if he will join this team. At first, Steve is hesitant. He's still catching up on this new era, but the call to duty, the instinct to protect and serve, is alive in him. If the world is in danger, how can he not help? He agrees. Thus, Steve finds himself stepping into roles and situations he never imagined. He's introduced to a brilliant scientist, Bruce Banner, who harbors a destructive alter ego known as the Hulk. He meets master spy Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, and skilled archer Clint Barton, Hawkeye. And then there's Tony Stark, Howard's son, now grown and a genius billionaire in his own right, known as Iron Man, clad in a red metal suit that flies and fires beams. Tony's personality is brash and witty, starkly contrasting with Steve's earnest and straightforward manner. Their initial meetings are prickly. Tony teases Steve as capsicle for being frozen and questions if Steve is more than just a symbol from the past. Steve, who values humility and teamwork, finds Tony's ego and sarcasm grating, but they are on the same side, and there's mutual respect beneath their differences waiting to form. The threat of Loki becomes very real when they capture him, and then nearly lose everything, as Loki's minions attack the flying helicarrier that serves as S.H.I.E.L.'s mobile base. In a dramatic assault, an enslaved Clint Barton, mind-controlled by Loki, wreaks havoc, and Bruce Banner tragically hulks out, causing chaos. Amidst a turbine explosion that nearly sends the helicarrier plummeting from the sky, Steve and Tony must work together to save the ship. Steve, clad again in a version of his old uniform updated for the times, finds himself giving commands, coordinating with Tony. The two men, one embodying old-fashioned honor, the other modern innovation, manage to restart the damaged turbine in a perilous operation, each covering for the other in turn. It's a baptism by fire for this nascent team, but through it, Steve starts to see Tony's courage and ingenuity up close, and Tony recognizes Steve's steadfast reliability and leadership. In the quiet moments between crises, Steve's still grappling with this new world's culture. There's a poignant scene where he's in the gym of the helicarrier late at night, pummeling a heavy boxing bag mercilessly, taking out frustration and pent-up feelings. He lands punch after punch, far harder than any normal human could, eventually sending the bag flying off its hook. Fury arrives quietly, seeing the row of destroyed punching bags, a silent testament to Steve's inner turmoil. Fury approaches to check on him. Steve admits softly that he's having trouble sleeping, that when he went under the world was at war, and when he woke up, the world still seemed at war, just with new faces and new battles. Fury encourages him that fighting for what's right never goes out of style. Before long, Loki's plan comes to fruition. He opens a portal above New York City, using the stolen Tesseract to bring in an alien army, the Chitauri, to invade Earth. Suddenly, Steve finds himself in full combat mode again, but this time in the canyons of Manhattan rather than the fields of Europe. Amid skyscrapers and modern city streets, Captain America leads with the same valor as always. The Avengers, still uncertain as a team, rally under his steady directives. In one iconic moment, amidst the rubble of Grand Central Station, Steve stands with Iron Man, Thor the god of thunder, who has joined to stop his brother Loki, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and the Hulk. A monstrous leviathan, a huge flying alien creature, roars in the distance. The six heroes stand back to back, as the camera, if this were film, would circle them, and Steve feels a surge of purpose. This is his new platoon, and he will lead them. "All right, listen up," he addresses them, voice calm but authoritative, issuing assignments. Thor, bottleneck that portal. Iron Man,
You perimeter. Hawkeye, vantage point up high. Natasha, contain stragglers. And Hulk, he glances at the enormous green giant. Smash. That last bit, he says with a tiny wry smile. The Hulk grins surprisingly and leaps away to do just that.
Battle rages, but Steve keeps his cool. He saves civilians when he can, directing frightened bystanders to safety in shelters or behind police lines. At one point, a group of NYPD officers are unsure of taking orders from a guy in a flag costume. But after witnessing Steve take down a horde of aliens with stunning skill, they quickly follow his lead. Steve rescues a dozen people trapped in a bus, shielding them from alien gunfire with his vibranium shield as he escorts them out. Amidst the chaos, there's a moment where Steve enters a building to help evacuate, and he has to face a group of Chitauri alone. In the dim lobby, dust and debris falling around, Steve takes a deep breath, centers himself, and fights with grace and efficiency. Each punch, each shield throw is measured and precise. His movements are almost a dance, a far cry from the frantic brawls in alleyways he once struggled through. The super soldier has come fully into his element. Eventually, the battle is won. Iron Man delivers a nuclear missile launched misguidedly by superiors through the portal, destroying the Chitauri mothership, and then falls back to Earth, with the Hulk catching him. The portal is closed, Loki is defeated, and the exhausted Avengers stand amid the wreckage of Midtown victorious. After, as police and emergency services take over, the six heroes find a moment of respite together. They share a silent camaraderie forged in battle. For Steve, it's a relief. He has found a place, and he's not alone. It's the beginning of genuine friendships. Tony's wit starts to amuse rather than annoy him. He bonds with Banner over discussions of science versus old-school knowledge. He and Thor exchange respectful nods, and with Natasha and Clint, fellow soldiers, he develops mutual trust. But once the adrenaline fades, Steve experiences the quiet letdown. There's a shot of him later, back at S.H.I.E.L.D., overlooking the city from a helicarrier deck. The night after the battle, he can't help but feel a pang of sorrow thinking of those who aren't here. Bucky, Peggy, whom he assumes has passed by now, not yet knowing she lives in old age, and all his howling commandos, but he steels himself with the knowledge that he's carrying on their legacy by saving lives in this new era. Not wanting to remain idle, Steve accepts Fury's subsequent assignments. He does a few S.H.I.E.L.D. missions, including recording some comically stilted public service announcements for schools. So, you got detention. He starts in one, which later will amuse high schoolers who find it quaint. But soon Steve is called to a more personal mission. S.H.I.E.L.D. itself is threatened from within. By 2014, Steve is working closely with Natasha Romanoff and new friend Sam Wilson, a veteran pararescue soldier he meets during a morning run in Washington, D.C. Their first meeting delightfully marked by Sam hearing a polite voice repeatedly lapping him from behind saying, "On your left," as Steve jogs at high speed around the reflecting pool. That humorous encounter blossoms into a genuine friendship, with Sam, an easygoing and kind soul, offering Steve support in adjusting to modern life and recommending music like Marvin Gaye's Troubleman album to catch up on some culture. Sam's empathy and military background give them common ground, and Steve enjoys their conversations, often laced with gentle humor. However, things take a dark turn when Nick Fury is attacked and apparently killed by a mysterious assassin known as the Winter Soldier. Fury's dying act is handing Steve a flash drive with encrypted secrets, warning him not to trust anyone.
This triggers events where Steve becomes a fugitive from the very organization he worked for. In a tense sequence at S.H.I.E.L.D., that's headquarters the Triskelion, Steve refuses to divulge what Fury gave him to senior official Alexander Pierce. That decision forces Steve to flee as strike teams try to apprehend him. Natasha joins him, revealing she's equally unsure who to trust. Together they go on the run, trying to unravel the conspiracy. In a quiet moment hiding in a mall disguised and incognito, Steve and Natasha share some banter, her playful suggestions about him dating, and Steve bashfully admitting he hasn't really met anyone, his heart perhaps still very much tethered to a memory of the past. Natasha, with a knowing half-smile, realizes Steve's still carrying a torch for a certain British agent he left decades ago. Piece by piece, they uncover that Hydra, the evil Steve thought defeated in 1945, has secretly lived on, growing like a parasite within S.H.I.E.L.D. for decades, waiting to enact a plan to control the world by eliminating threats preemptively. The realization sends a chill through Steve. It means everything he fought for could have been compromised. It means that Peggy and Howard Stark and others who built S.H.I.E.L.D. in the post-war era had been unknowingly working alongside hidden enemies. Steve's innate sense of trust is shaken, but he presses on with resolve to expose and stop this threat.
During these events, Steve takes a particularly emotionally jarring hit in an old bunker at Camp Lehigh, his own WWI training camp. He finds a secret computer that contains the preserved consciousness of Dr. Arnim Zola, the Hydra scientist. Zola reveals how Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. and has been sowing chaos to make humanity trade freedom for security. Shortly after, a missile strikes, and Steve barely escapes with Natasha. This betrayal from within, the ghost of Hydra, is a heavy weight on Steve's heart. But perhaps the most painful discovery is yet to come. The mysterious Winter Soldier, the assassin with a metal arm, who has been hunting them, is Bucky. Steve's childhood friend, somehow still alive, but brainwashed to be a killer. The reveal happens on a rooftop after a frenetic chase. Steve rips the mask off the Winter Soldier during a fight, ready to finally see the face of this lethal operative, and he freezes in absolute shock as he stares into Bucky's eyes, older, hardened, but undoubtedly Bucky's. "Bucky," Steve whispers, hope and confusion in his voice. But Bucky's face is emotionless, not recognizing Steve at all, and he attacks again before escaping. This shatters Steve's heart anew. Bucky survived the fall, only to be captured and turned into a weapon by Hydra, kept cryogenically frozen and thawed for missions over decades. Steve grapples with a swirl of emotions: elation that Bucky's alive, horror at what's been done to him, guilt that he wasn't there to save him, and determination to bring his friend back. In the final act at the Triskelion, as Hydra attempts to launch helicarriers that will slaughter millions whom Zola's algorithm deemed threats, Steve delivers a heartfelt speech over the intercom, telling any loyal S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that the organization has been compromised and calling them to stand up and fight back. "The price of freedom is high," Steve says, "and it's a price I'm willing to pay. If I'm the only one, so be it, but I'm willing to bet I'm not." His words, steady and filled with conviction, inspire those good agents to take back their agency. Steve then boards one of the helicarriers to replace a guidance chip and stop the targeting. There he faces Winter Soldier Bucky again in brutal hand-to-hand combat on the tilting deck of the airborne carrier. Steve tries desperately not to hurt Bucky more than necessary, even as Bucky fights viciously, with no memory of their friendship, only programming telling him Steve is the enemy. At last, as the helicarrier is going down in flames due to the team's efforts, Steve refuses to defend himself any longer against Bucky. In a poignant, rain-soaked confrontation inside the wrecking ship, Steve drops his shield out of reach. "I'm not going to fight you," he says softly, voice carrying both resignation and hope. "You're my friend." Bucky, face twisting in confusion and anger, delivers blow after blow to Steve, who does nothing to resist now, but instead tries to reach Bucky mentally. "You're my mission," Bucky growls, repeating what he's been brainwashed to believe. Steve, one eye swollen, bleeding and bruised, chokes out through a swollen lip. "Then finish it, 'cause I'm with you till the end of the line." Those words, the very ones Bucky had said to him years and years ago on that quiet Brooklyn street, cut through the mental fog. Bucky's fist hesitates mid-air, trembling. Recognition sparks in Bucky's eyes as long-buried memories fight to surface. Before anything else can be said, the damaged helicarrier breaks apart completely, and Steve plunges into the Potomac River below as debris rains down. Steve is unconscious as he sinks into the dark water, too exhausted and injured to save himself. But then, a strong hand reaches into the depths and pulls him to safety. On a muddy riverbank, Bucky stands over Steve's limp body. He'd saved Steve from drowning, dragging him out of the river, an act of a friend, not a mindless assassin. Bucky looks at Steve's battered face, conflict and sorrow in his expression. Without a word, Bucky turns and disappears into the woods, going into hiding to sort out his fractured mind. Steve is left alive, retrieved moments later by Sam and others who were searching for him. When Steve awakens in a hospital bed for real this time, not a faked scenario, Sam Wilson is by his side, ever loyal, playing Marvin Gaye's Trouble Man softly on a speaker to ease his friend back into consciousness with a touch of soul. Steve is battered but alive, and though the mission was costly, they stopped Hydra's plan. S.H.I.E.L.D., as it was, is essentially disbanded in the aftermath, due to the extent of the corruption revealed. The world has changed again for Steve, but this time he helped shape that change. Still, Steve's heart is heavy with Bucky's fate uncertain. He's lost him a second time, in a way, but now with the glimmer of hope that Bucky's true self might not be gone after all. Steve resolves that he won't give up on Bucky. He and Sam quietly set a goal to track Bucky down, to help him recover from Hydra's influence. For now though, Steve tries to find a semblance of normalcy. It never lasts long for a man like him. By 2015, Steve is not in hiding, but rather fully re-engaged in hero work. With S.H.I.E.L.D. gone, the world looks to the Avengers for protection. Steve and Natasha, alongside Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, Thor and Hawkeye, continue to operate as a team out of Stark's resources. They hit a Hydra base in Sokovia to retrieve Loki's scepter, a leftover threat from the New York invasion, being used by Baron Strucker for experiments. This operation is swift and successful, albeit they encountered two enhanced individuals, Wanda Maximoff and her twin brother Pietro, who later switch sides. Back at Avengers Tower, an attempt by Tony and Bruce to utilize the scepter's power for an AI defense system goes horribly awry, birthing Ultron, a rogue AI that immediately turns on humanity. Ultron is a different kind of enemy, not personal to Steve like Hydra, but a global threat nonetheless. As Ultron unleashes havoc, Steve leads the team once more through battles in far-flung locales, from an African shipyard to Seoul. These fights test them in new ways. Wanda Maximoff initially fights against them, using her mind-altering powers to force Steve to confront his deepest guilt and longing. She induces a vision in which Steve finds himself back in a 1940s ballroom. The music is gentle, couples dance under soft light. The war is won, it's everything he ever wanted. Peggy Carter approaches him in an elegant red dress, smiling radiantly, and invites him to dance. "We won, Steve," she says. "We did it. You're free to go home." Steve, in the vision, feels an overwhelming mixture of joy and sorrow. He takes Peggy in his arms to dance. But even in this dreamlike state, something doesn't sit right. As Wanda's magic intended, it leaves him with a sense of profound loss, of a life that can never be, distracting him from the present fight. This vision stays with Steve, an aching reminder of how much he sacrificed. It's a life he could have had, if only, if only. But Steve Rogers, resilient as ever, does not dwell too long in despair. He shakes off Wanda's influence and regroups with his team at a safe house, Clint's farmhouse, where for a short time, Steve experiences the warmth of family life he's rarely touched. Clint's wife and children welcome them, and Steve helps with chores, chopping wood easily with his enhanced strength, until Tony takes over in a playful one-up-manship moment. One evening at the farmhouse, Steve steps outside to find a starry sky above the quiet fields, the kind of starry sky one can't see in the city. He takes a moment to inhale the scent of hay and earth, listening to the sounds of a normal life. The distant laughter of Clint's kids, the clink of dishes, as Laura, Clint's wife, cleans up. Thor's deep voice chatting with Tony inside. Natasha finds Steve leaning against a fence, deep in thought. They share a quiet conversation. Natasha, who rarely opens up, confides some of her own feelings of being unable to have a normal life, and Steve empathizes deeply. Both soldiers in different ways, they find comfort in each other's understanding. "Maybe we don't get to have the kind of life we once dreamed about," Steve says softly. "Gaze on the night sky, but we can protect the life others have. That's something." Natasha nods, resting her head briefly on Steve's shoulder in a gesture of friendship and solace, before they head back inside. Duty soon calling again. The climax with Ultron is intense. In Sokovia, Ultron attempts to lift an entire city into the sky to create a catastrophic meteor-like impact. Amid this battle, Steve shows his unwavering dedication to saving every life possible. While Iron Man and Thor attempt to thwart the Doomsday Plan technologically, Steve is on the floating city streets, helping civilians into evacuation transports. He goes door to door with Wanda, who has since joined them after seeing Ultron's true evil, to shepherd families out. When things look dire, Steve even tells his team that if they can't stop the city from falling safely, they'll all go down with it while trying to save as many people as they can. He will never prioritize himself over innocence. Fortunately, the Avengers succeed in destroying Ultron and saving the people with some help from Nick Fury's timely arrival and Pietro's sacrifice. In the aftermath, as the dust settles, Steve stands looking over the ruined city of Sokovia, heart-heavy for the lives lost, but also proud of those saved. The Avengers have paid a price. The team will be changed after this, with some members retiring, Hawkeye to his family and new ones joining. By the time the Avengers set up a new base in upstate New York, Steve takes on a mentorship role. He and Natasha begin training the next roster, Wanda Maximoff, now a powerful ally, coping with her grief. Sam Wilson, who officially joins as Falcon with his winged flight suit. James Rhodey Rhodes' War Machine, Tony's best friend, and Vision, a new, gentle synthetic being born from the Mind Stone, who proved his worth in battle. There's a sense of moving forward, Steve as the leader and coach, guiding this younger team. However, life for Steve is never static or simple. 2016 brings the challenge of the Sokovia Accords, international oversight for the Avengers, after some fear the unchecked power of heroes. The catalyst is a mission in Lagos, Nigeria, where Steve and his team stop a terrorist, an old enemy, Rumlow, from stealing a biological weapon. But in the chaos, Wanda's attempt to save Steve inadvertently causes an explosion that harms civilians. The guilt weighs on Wanda, and Steve, visiting the injured later, or hearing of the casualties, hits him hard. Thus, when Tony Stark supports the idea of governmental control, having been confronted by a grieving mother who lost her son in Sokovia, a rift forms in the Avengers. Tony, burdened by guilt from Ultron's creation and other events, believes oversight is necessary. Steve, with his experience of S.H.I.E.L.D's corruption and a fundamental belief in personal responsibility, hesitates to sign away autonomy. He's wary that political agendas could impede them from saving lives or force them into morally questionable actions. This philosophical divide deepens dramatically when the situation becomes personal. Steve's long-lost friend, Bucky, re-enters the picture, framed for a bombing at the UN in Vienna, which kills the King of Wakanda. Knowing Bucky is not the monster the world thinks, Steve goes rogue to protect him, leading to a confrontation with Tony's pro-Accords team. The chase in Bucharest, Steve defending Bucky from relentless attack by authorities, and T'Challa, the new Wakandan Black Panther seeking revenge, is breathless. Steve won't let Bucky be killed. He sees through Bucky's confused, haunted eyes that his friend is not in his right mind, but is not evil either. Captured briefly and brought in as fugitives, Steve and Sam and Bucky are held in a high-security facility. When a psychologist, who is actually Helmut Zemo, the true villain seeking to destroy the Avengers from within, activates Bucky's brainwashing to have him rampage, Steve fights hard to subdue him and then chooses to go outside the law entirely to protect his friend and stop Zemo. He assembles a few loyal allies. Sam, Wanda, Clint, Hawkeye comes out of retirement to help Steve, and even enlists Scott Lang, Ant-Man, and they head to an airport in Germany, hoping to fly out and track Zemo. This leads to a dramatic confrontation at Leipzig Airport, Team Cap versus Team Iron Man. Even in the midst of what is essentially hero against hero combat, Steve's approach is tempered. They aren't out to seriously hurt their friends, just to get through them. The fight is spectacular yet tinged with tragedy. Steve trades blows with Tony, Natasha, T'Challa, and newcomers like a young Peter Parker Spider-Man, whom Tony brought along. At one point, Peter excitedly quips about how awesome it is to meet Captain America, even while trying to web him up. Steve, despite the situation, can't help but find the kid endearing, reminding him that they're not really trying to hurt him, and even complimenting Spidey's heart and zeal. The battle crescendos, and Steve manages to escape with Bucky due to Natasha, allowing them passage at a critical moment. She couldn't bring herself to stop Steve, her loyalty torn. Steve gives her a grateful, understanding look. They remain friends, even if they disagree. Steve and Bucky make it to Siberia, the site of a secret Hydra facility, where Zemo apparently went, potentially to unleash other brainwashed Winter Soldiers. Unexpectedly, Tony arrives not to fight, but having realized Bucky was framed. For a short time, it seems like Iron Man and Captain America are reconciled, the old friends nearly back on the same page as they cautiously enter the base together. Steve is hopeful. He appreciates Tony coming around and even looks ready to mend their friendship. But Zemo reveals his master stroke. He has footage that shows it was Bucky, as the Winter Soldier in 1991, who assassinated Tony's parents under Hydra's orders, and that Steve knew, at least in part, about their murder, though not that it was Bucky until recently. Tony is overwhelmed by grief and betrayal. In a cold bunker corridor, Tony's eyes well with tears as he asks Steve, "Did you know?" Steve, anguished, admits he knew Hebra had killed them but was not sure it was Bucky until now. Tony's face contorts with hurt and fury. At that moment, all reason leaves Tony and he attacks Bucky in a vengeful rage. Steve leaps in to protect Bucky. What ensues is a brutal, emotionally charged fight. Deep in the bowels of that Siberian base, just the three of them amidst flickering lights and concrete. This fight is unlike any Steve has had. It's not a battle for justice or to stop a villain's plan. It's a heartbreaking clash between friends. Tony's pain is understandable. Bucky's guilt, though he wasn't in control, is immense. And Steve is torn between two people he loves in different ways. Steve fights defensively, trying to restrain Tony without seriously hurting him. Bucky tries to assist Steve, but Tony's Iron Man suit has the upper hand in raw power. It's only by Steve's strategy, using his shield, leveraging Tony's weaknesses in close quarters, that they manage to disable Tony's armor. In a dramatic moment, Steve bashes Iron Man's arc reactor after a heated struggle, deactivating the suit. Tony falls to the ground, defeated physically, but the emotional wounds are far worse. Breathing heavily, Steve stands over Tony, shield in hand. All his pent-up frustration and sadness from this conflict are on his face. Tony, gasping, says bitterly, "That shield doesn't belong to you. You don't deserve it. My father made that shield." Those words cut deep. Steve looks at the dented circular shield in his hand, a gift from Howard Stark, Tony's father, who was also murdered that night in 1991. Steve's eyes meet Tony's. They are full of sorrow. Without a word, Steve lets the shield slip from his grasp. It clangs heavily onto the ground. He doesn't want anything that represents a bond broken or a trust betrayed. He would rather drop it than carry it out of that room against Tony's will. With Bucky injured, his metal arm blasted off by Tony during the fight, Steve helps Bucky up, and together they limp away, leaving Tony slumped there, grief-stricken. Outside, in the snowy expanse of Siberia, Steve and Bucky find refuge. In the aftermath, Steve sends Tony a letter, delivered quietly, which Tony reads back home, apologizing for hiding the truth, and expressing that despite their differences, if Tony ever needs him, he'll be there. It's Steve's olive branch, his way of saying their friendship matters to him no matter what has transpired. Now a fugitive in the eyes of many governments, Steve goes into hiding. He breaks out his allies from a prison, the raft where they were detained. We see Steve in shadow, determination etched on his face, as he frees Sam, Wanda, Clint and Scott from their cells, a silent promise kept. He will not leave his friends behind, ever. They all vanish off the grid, becoming a covert group that still tries to help people where they can, but always underground. During this time, Steve grows a beard, adopts a dark stealth suit without the bright colors or star, shedding some of the Captain America symbolism, while the mantle is effectively shelved. He is for all intents and purposes Nomad, though he never uses that name. It's a life in the shadows, one Steve navigates with grit and the companionship of Natasha and Sam, who stick with him throughout. Despite being a wanted man, Steve finds a sense of purpose in these secret missions, stopping threats quietly. He also never stops searching for Bucky's cure, which comes when T'Challa, the new king of Wakanda, kindly offers refuge and science to help deprogram Bucky. Bucky chooses to enter cryostasis again in Wakanda until a cure is found, with Steve's support and promise that this time he is not lost or alone. Steve owes T'Challa a great debt for this mercy towards Bucky,
especially after what happened to T'Challa's own father, for which Bucky was framed. It speaks to T'Challa's nobility, and Steve respects him deeply for it.
Time progresses, and Steve's fugitive Avengers operate in the shadows until 2018, when a threat larger than anything before emerges: Thanos, a powerful warlord from beyond the stars, who seeks the 6 Infinity Stones to wipe out half of all life in the universe. The war begins without Steve initially, as Tony and others face Thanos' minions in New York and elsewhere. Steve's team first comes into play when Wanda and Vision, who had been developing a touching romance while Steve was away, are attacked in Scotland by 2 of Thanos' lieutenants. Vision is powered by the Mind Stone in his forehead, one of the 6 sought by Thanos. Wanda and Vision are ambushed at night on a rainy Edinburgh street, fighting for their lives. Just when it seems like they might be overwhelmed, Steve appears, stepping out of the shadows of a train station with Natasha and Sam at his side. It's a striking return, Steve, bearded and in dark attire, catching a midnight train's passing light. Without his shield, left behind in Siberia, Steve makes do with sheer skill and some Wakandan metal gauntlets. The fight is brief but intense, ending with the aliens retreating and Steve reuniting with his old allies Wanda and Vision, offering a steadying presence in a dire situation. He brings them to the new Avengers compound and reunites with Rhodey and Banner there. There is a bittersweet quality to these reunions, joy in seeing old friends, but tension underlying because of the circumstances. Bruce mentions to Steve that Tony, who is currently lost in space after a battle on Titan, often spoke of Steve, hinting that Tony still cares despite their fallout. Steve, hearing Tony's name, shows a hint of longing and regret, but focuses on the impending crisis. There's no time for personal issues. Duty calls once again. With Thanos' forces closing in, Steve leads the decision to take Vision to Wakanda, the most advanced nation on Earth, to attempt removing the Mind Stone without killing Vision. Arriving in Wakanda is a bright spot for Steve in these dark times. He's greeted by T'Challa with the handshake and warmth of allies. Bucky is there too, awakened and healed from his mental conditioning, referred to fondly by local children as the White Wolf. There's a brief, heartfelt reunion where Bucky and Steve embrace forearm to forearm, relief and brotherly love passing between their smiles. "Good to see you, Buck," Steve says, clap on his friend's shoulder. "Save it," Bucky replies lightly. "I hope you're ready for another fight." Though they exchange banter, the significance of Bucky's clear eyes and calm demeanor is not lost on Steve. His friend is truly back. The tranquility of Wakanda's golden plains and futurist city is soon shattered by the arrival of Thanos' alien army, the Outriders. They come in a wave of black feral creatures, seeking to overrun the city and get to Vision's Mind Stone. The Wakandan forces, led by King T'Challa and the fierce Dora Milaje, stand side by side with the Avengers. On the eve of battle, there's a brief respite. Steve and Bucky stand together, looking out over the fields where they know war will soon roll in. Bucky comments, wry and affectionate, "Not the first time we've fought side by side against crazy odds." Steve smirks softly, "Won't be the last either." Bucky then hands Steve something wrapped in cloth, courtesy of T'Challa, a new shield, or rather 2 smaller sleek shields, one for each arm, made of vibranium. "Thought you might be needing these," Bucky says. Steve accepts them and straps them on, testing the weight. They extend into sharp points. It's different from his old shield, but in his hands they feel right. He gives Bucky an appreciative nod. The battle that follows is enormous, chaotic, and fierce. Yet Steve is in the thick of it, calm and resolute. Alien creatures crash against the shield dome, protecting the city until they force their way through. Steve stands at the front line with T'Challa. There's a quiet moment where the two leaders share a look of mutual respect. Then T'Challa, in his Black Panther suit, initiates the charge with a rallying cry in Exosa. Steve, sprinting alongside the superhumanly fast king, actually manages to keep pace thanks to his serum-enhanced speed. Together they're the first to clash with the onrushing horde. Steve's twin shields slice through the four-armed outrutters. He punches and bashes with controlled ferocity. Around him, war cries mix with the roars of battle, but Steve remains a focused force, shouting strategic orders when needed, pulling comrades out of harm's way, and always pushing forward. During a lull, Steve and the Avengers get a much-needed boost when Thor arrives with a crack of lightning, alongside Rocket Raccoon and Groot, turning the tide. Amid the fray, Steve shares a brief grin with Thor, who jovially exclaims, "Captain, good to see you, friend. I see you copied my beard." Steve chuckles. In the heat of war, such levity is a balm. But the relief is short-lived. Thanos himself soon appears, having acquired all but the Mind Stone. One by one he swats aside the remaining heroes. Steve is one of the last standing. He faces Thanos one-on-one, exhausted but unwavering. In a scene that showcases Steve's indomitable spirit, Thanos swings his massive arm, and Steve catches it, holding it back for a moment, through sheer will and strength. There's a flicker of surprise on Thanos' face that this mere human is resisting him at all. But even Steve is no match for a nearly fully powered Thanos. A powerful backhand sends Steve sprawling, his face bloodied, as Thanos marches on to rip the Mind Stone from Vision, completing the Infinity Gauntlet. Steve can only watch in horror as Thanos achieves his goal. In a snap of fingers, half of all life dissolves into dust in what will be called the blip. The quiet that descends is eerie and devastating. On the battlefield, Steve looks around, panting heavily. "Did we just lose?" he whispers in disbelief. Around him, comrades begin to crumble. Bucky is the first near him. Bucky stumbles towards Steve. "Steve," he says quietly, before turning to ash. Steve's eyes go wide with shock as he lurches forward, trying to grasp at the remnants of his best friend that slipped through his fingers. Bucky is gone, again in an instant. This time, not even a body to mourn. Elsewhere, T'Challa, Wanda, Sam, and so many others fade away in the breeze. Steve falls to his knees, trembling, his heart breaking anew as he realizes the scope of loss. He feels utterly helpless for the first time in a long time. All his strength couldn't stop this. In the silence after Thanos retreats, we find Steve Rogers sitting on the ground amid Wakanda's battlefield, dirt and ash staining his once vibrant gear. He's breathing shakily. Black Widow comes to his side, her face etched with sorrow and shock. Steve can only mutter, "Oh God," repeatedly, in anguish. He has failed to protect what mattered most, and half of everyone, everywhere, is gone. It's a dark, grief-laden aftermath. What follows are the hardest years of Steve's life. Returning to America, Steve and Natasha essentially lead what remains of the Avengers in trying to maintain some order and hope in a half-empty world. The weight of loss is tremendous. There's an incredibly poignant scene of Steve leading a support group in 2023 in a community center in New York. Dressed in plain clothes, no uniform, Steve listens as survivors talk about their lives. After the blip, one man shares a story of going on a date, trying to find normalcy. Steve empathizes deeply. When it's his turn to speak, he offers gentle encouragement. "The world is in our hands," he says softly to the group. "We got to do something with it. Otherwise, Thanos might as well kill all of us too." It's both a call to keep living and a reflection of the despair lingering in them all. He shares a philosophy he's embraced, a variation of Peggy's wisdom. You got to move on. We got to move on. But whether he truly believes he himself can move on is uncertain. He misses his friends. He often visits Tony's empty cabin or the Avengers memorials. He likely tried to look after Wanda until she went her own way in grief. It's a quiet, somber life of trying to help others cope as he himself struggles. Then, like a spark of light in the darkness, hope returns in the form of Scott Lang, Ant-Man, who had been trapped in the quantum realm and escaped after 5 years, though for him only hours. He proposes the wild idea of using quantum time travel to undo Thanos' snap. Steve, Natasha, and the remaining team grasp onto this hope. They consult Tony, who initially is reluctant, having moved on somewhat, living a secluded family life with Pepper and his young daughter Morgan. But soon Tony's conscience and brilliance lead him to crack the problem of time travel safely. With this plan in motion, Steve sees a path to undo the tragedy, something almost never possible in life. He might bring everyone back, Bucky, Sam, Wanda, all those lost. He might even fix his biggest failure. In planning the time heist, Steve and Tony finally bury the hatchet completely. In a scene at the Avengers compound at dusk, Tony drives up and wordlessly returns the iconic Captain America shield to Steve, the same one Steve left behind after their fight. "Got to get this to you somehow," Tony says with a hint of apology, gently handing it over. Steve, surprised and moved, looks at Tony. "Are you sure?" he asks. Tony half smiles. "My father made it for you. Plus, I'm way too skinny to use it." It's a moment of forgiveness and reconciliation. Steve straps the shield back on, a sense of wholeness returning. "Thank you, Tony," he says sincerely. With a wry tone, Tony adds, "Don't tell anyone, but it does your outfit much more justice." Steve laughs softly, relief evident in his eyes. The friendship mended, they stand together with a renewed sense of purpose. The mission is complex: retrieve the 6 Infinity Stones from various points in time to assemble their own gauntlet and snap everyone back. Steve's team travels to 2012 New York during the Battle of New York, the events of the first Avengers film. This provides some of the more light-hearted moments in a long while for Steve. He sees his younger self in the middle of a past battle, all clean-shaven and rigid in his mindset. At one point, 2023, Steve ends up fighting 2012 Steve, who mistakes him for Loki in disguise. The fight is intense, evenly matched, because they are literally the same person, though older Steve has the benefit of experience. During their duel in the abandoned upper floor of Stark Tower, young Steve utters, "I can do this all day," with that trademark confidence and stubbornness. Old Steve, grappling in a headlock, rolls his eyes at his own catchphrase, a bit exasperated. "Yeah, I know. It's a gentle comedic beat." Even Steve can poke fun at himself, realizing how single-minded he used to be. Eventually, older Steve outsmarts his younger self by mentioning Bucky is alive to distract him, then knocks him out. Looking down at his unconscious earlier self, Steve can't help but feel a tad weird. He notices something on the floor. It's the pocket watch compass, with Peggy's picture from his younger self that fell out during the scuffle. Steve picks it up and gazes at Peggy's image again, her youthful face behind the cracked old glass. So much has happened,
but seeing her visage centers him. He gently returns it to his younger self's belt, a quiet sign of respect across time, before moving on.
The plan hits a snag when the team fails to get the Space Stone in 2012. But Steve and Tony pivot to another idea, go further back to 1970, where both the Space Stone in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s possession and PIM particles needed for time travel can be found. Army base in New Jersey. Ironically, the same Camp Lehigh where Steve trained in 1943, now decades later. For Steve, walking those grounds in 1970, disguised in a soldier's uniform, is surreal. Echoes of the past loom. He sees the old barracks, the flagpole he once climbed. Perhaps ghosts of drills he ran echo in his mind. While Tony goes to find the stone, Steve's task is to get PIM particles from Hank Pym's lab. On his way out of the facility, Steve hides in an office to avoid detection and unexpectedly finds himself looking through a window into a separated office where Peggy Carter, in 1970, her early 50s, and the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., is speaking with colleagues. She looks as vibrant and determined as ever, though streaks of grey touch her hair. Steve's breath catches in his throat. He stands utterly still, afraid any movement will shatter the moment. Peggy steps into her office just a few feet, and several years away from Steve's hiding spot, picking up some files. Steve watches, his eyes glassy with longing. This is the woman he loved, who believed in him, who mourned him and lived a whole life thinking he was gone. Here she is, alive and in her prime. Steve's heart aches, both joyful to see her and pained by the separation of time. He whispers her name under his breath, voice barely audible. Peggy. Peggy senses something, perhaps a presence, and looks towards the glass. But Steve has pressed himself against the wall out of her line of sight. After she leaves, Steve remains for a second, grappling with his emotions. This encounter plants a seed in his mind, a thought he can't entertain now, but will linger, the possibility of a life with Peggy, however impossible it seems. With their mission accomplished, the Avengers return to 2023. They piece together a gauntlet, and Hulk uses it to snap everyone back, at great physical cost to himself. It seems to work. We see signs of life returning, birds chirping, Clint's phone receiving a call from his once dusted wife. Steve's heart leaps at the thought that Bucky, Sam, and all others might be alive again somewhere. But before they can celebrate, the time-traveling Thanos from 2014, who discovered their plan and jumped to the future, attacks the Avengers compound in explosive fashion. The building is devastated, and Steve emerges from the rubble to face the worst of it. Thanos, in full armor, sits waiting with his double-bladed sword. Not far off, Thor and Tony likewise rise from debris. They exchange determined looks. Without words, the big three of the Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor, step forward together to confront Thanos. The battle is relentless. Thor dual wields his new axe, Stormbreaker, and his old hammer, Mjolnir, which he brought from 2013 during the time heist, and which Steve had kindly called to him in a heartfelt scene to boost his confidence. But Thanos is ferocious and more skilled than the last time they fought, since he doesn't have the gauntlet yet weighing him down. He knocks Iron Man aside, pummels Thor, and nearly drives Stormbreaker into Thor's chest. Steve, knocked down moments before, shakes off his pain and sees Thor in peril. Summoning every ounce of resolve, Steve calls out and stretches forth his hand, and Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, flies into Steve's grasp.
The power of Thor's might flows through him, lightning crackling around. Steve, who has always been worthy, now wields the hammer, coming to Thor's rescue. Thor, despite his dire situation, beams with battered pride. "I knew it," he laughs through bloody teeth. With shield in one hand and Mjolnir in the other, Steve unleashes a level of fighting he's never reached before. The lightning-empowered strikes and throws give Thanos pause. Steve whirls the hammer, calling thunder from the sky, striking Thanos again and again, pushing him back. It's a stunning sight. Captain America, illuminated by lightning, embodying the might of gods and the will of mortals combined. Yet even this might is not enough to easily win. Thanos is incredibly powerful and cunning. He breaks off part of Steve's shield with repeated blows of his colossal sword. Steve's arm goes numb under one particularly vicious hit, and the iconic shield, which has symbolized so much, is now in pieces, the top half shattered. Steve falls, and Mjolnir slips from his hand. Thanos stands over him, declaring that he will enjoy destroying Earth to its last atom. But Steve Rogers, bloody face streaked with dirt and blood, refuses to yield. Alone, facing Thanos and his entire army, which has now arrived through the portal, masses of Chitauri, alien gorilla-like Chitauri, the Black Order lieutenants revived, and more. Steve stands back up. It's one of the defining images of Steve's life. One man, uniform torn, shield broken, but straps tightened on his arm, standing against hopeless odds, simply because it's the right thing to do. His breath is ragged, but his eyes blaze with resolve. If this is the end, he'll go down fighting.
And then a voice in his earpiece. "Hey Cap, you read me? On your left?" It's Sam Wilson. Steve's heart leaps as he recognizes the familiar phrase and voice, turning his head. Behind him, shimmering portals conjured by Doctor Strange's magic begin to appear across the devastated landscape. Through them step the allies Steve thought lost. Black Panther and the Wakandans to his left, Doctor Strange and other sorcerers, the armies of Wakanda and Asgard, the Guardians of the Galaxy, and most meaningfully Bucky, Sam with his falcon wings spread, and many others, all restored. The relief and joy that floods Steve's face is profound. Reinforcements have arrived, answering the call, proving that he never fights alone. As they assemble behind him, Steve finally gets to say, "Avengers, assemble." It's not a loud booming yell as one might expect, but a firm, powerful call to arms uttered with the knowledge of what it means. In this moment, for the first time since waking in this century, Steve feels whole, all his friends by his side, united for a cause, just like the best days of the war. But on an even grander scale, what follows is the grand final battle, a swirling melee of heroes versus Thanos' forces. Steve fights with ferocity and heart. He coordinates with others, teaming up in brilliant ways. At one point he and Thor exchange weapons mid-fight for fun, Thor exclaiming that Steve take the small one, the hammer, while Thor swings the larger axe. Steve uses Mjolnir to call down lightning on the battlefield, stunning enemies. He rescues those in trouble and stands against Thanos whenever needed. It's a blur of action, but key moments that last in memory include Steve and Tony sharing a look of trust as they maneuver to try and get the gauntlet away from Thanos, or Steve shielding smaller heroes from blasts, his broken shield still doing its best. Amid the chaos, Steve catches sight of Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, arriving like a comet and nearly taking down Thanos. He watches as the fate of the universe comes down to a desperate struggle for the gauntlet. When Tony ultimately outsmarts Thanos and sacrifices himself by using the stones, Steve is there not far off, witnessing the snap that turns Thanos and his army to dust. The sudden silence after Thanos fades is immense. The battlefield grows quiet, except for the moans of wounded and the crackling of fires. Steve finds Tony, collapsed and dying from the overwhelming energy of the stones. Steve's breath hitches Tony. He kneels opposite Rhodey and Peter Parker, grief-stricken. Pepper Potts is there to comfort Tony in his final moments. Steve can only watch, tears in his eyes, as this man he's come to respect deeply, maybe even love like a brother, takes his last breath. It hits Steve hard. Tony was the one who brought them together, who could infuriate him like no other, but also who inspired and saved them all in the end. Steve stands as Pepper kisses Tony goodbye and closes his eyes, overwhelmed by the enormity of what's happened. Victory at such a cost. Steve steps back, tears running freely. He finds a seat among some rubble, exhausted to his very soul, and covers his face with his hand, weeping quietly for his friend. In the aftermath, we see a gentle scene, Tony Stark's funeral by the lake at his cabin. A line of wreaths floats on the water, and one carries Tony's first arc reactor with the inscription, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. Steve stands with others. He's cleaned up, wearing a black suit. Beside him are Sam and Bucky. Behind him, he feels a supportive hand squeeze his shoulder gently. It's perhaps Rhodey or Clint. The ceremony is quiet, the loss palpable. Steve's arm is around Natasha's shoulder on one side, though actually, Natasha died earlier retrieving the Soul Stone. She's absent from the funeral, which is another grief Steve carries silently. He lost her too during the mission, something that still weighs on him. Actually, correct that. At the funeral present are almost all Avengers except Natasha, Vision, not yet restored in any way, and Tony himself who's being honored. Wanda and Clint stand off by the house, exchanging their own comfort about Natasha and Vision's loss. Steve reflects on all of it, the cost of victory and the gift of having known these extraordinary people. After the funeral, the time comes for Steve to fulfill one last mission for the Avengers. The Infinity Stones need to be returned to their original times to avoid branching realities. Steve volunteers to do it. He's the one most familiar with self-sacrifice, and also perhaps trusts himself alone to ensure it's done right. Secretly, he also has another plan in mind, one he hasn't spoken aloud, but that those closest to him might suspect. At the edge of the same lake, a makeshift quantum platform is prepared. Sam and Bucky approach Steve, who is now wearing his Captain America uniform again, and carrying Mjolnir to return it to its time as well. He also has a case containing the Infinity Stones. Sam looks unsure, sensing an air of finality in this parting. How long is this gonna take? Sam asks. Bruce Banner, operating the machine, explains that for them, Steve will be back in a few seconds from now, even if it takes as long as he needs. Steve nods, taking this in. He looks at his two dear friends, Sam, who's been steadfast at his side these last years, and Bucky, his lifelong friend, miraculously returned to him. They exchange silent glances of understanding. Steve pulls both men into a warm hug, one by one. Bucky's expression is bittersweet. It seems he has a hint of what Steve might do, and is already accepting it. "Don't do anything stupid until I get back," Steve says, echoing one of their exchanges from the past. Bucky smiles faintly, eyes a bit misty. "How can I? You're taking all the stupid with you." They chuckle softly. Steve then turns to Sam. "You ready?" Sam asks, trying to smile bravely. Steve gives a sure nod. "Yeah."
I have to set a few things right. There's a weight to those words beyond just the stones. With a final nod from Bruce, Steve holds Muna and the case of stones, and in an instant vanishes into the quantum realm to return the items. The seconds tick by. 5 seconds. Bruce attempts to bring him back, but something unexpected happens. Steve doesn't reappear on the platform. Sam and Bucky are immediately concerned. Where is he? Sam asks, worry creeping in. Bruce checks the controls frantically. He doesn't see Steve in the time stream. Bucky, however, notices a figure sitting on a bench by the lake not far away. Sam, look, Bucky says quietly, pointing. Sam looks over to see an old man, sitting peacefully and looking out over the water. The sun is low in the sky, casting a golden glow.
They approach slowly, Sam's heart pounding. As they near, Sam recognizes the profile of the man. It's Steve, an elderly Steve Rogers, hair white and face lined with age, dressed in a neat shirt and jacket, with an old-fashioned cap by his side. He looks content. "Steve," Sam says, voice soft and astonished. Bucky hangs back a little, letting Sam have this moment, but smiling gently, tears in his eyes. Steve turns his head and greets Sam with a warm, gentle smile. His voice is older, tinged with decades of life lived. "Hi, Sam." Sam is at a loss for words. You mind telling me about her?" he finally asks, noticing a gold wedding ring on Steve's left hand. Steve's eyes twinkle as he lifts his hand slightly, gazing at the ring with profound love. No, I don't think I will," he replies, kindly but firmly, choosing to keep those precious memories to himself. Sam lets out a soft chuckle, nodding in understanding. Some things are just for Steve. Then Steve picks up something from beside him. It's his Captain America shield, whole and gleaming. Likely he went and retrieved or created a new one in the past timeline. He offers it to Sam. "Try it on," Steve says. Sam's eyes widen. "Steve, I'm not. I mean, this is yours." Steve gives an encouraging nod. "It's yours now." With trembling hands, Sam takes the shield and slides it onto his arm. It feels heavy with meaning. "How's it feel?" Steve asks. And Sam, voice thick with emotion, answers, "Like it's someone else's." Steve gently places his hand on Sam's shoulder. "It isn't." In that moment, Steve passes the mantle. He entrusts Sam Wilson to be the next Captain America, knowing his friend has the integrity, heart, and courage for it. It's a deeply meaningful transfer, done without pomp, just trust and respect. Bucky watches with pride. He nods affirmingly at Sam. Sam looks at the shield, then at Steve, tears in his eyes. "Thank you. I'll do my best." Steve smiles. "That's why it's yours." They both know it will not be easy. The world might not readily accept a new cap, but Steve has faith in Sam. As the breeze ripples the lake's surface, Sam realizes Steve chose a life for himself, something he had always advised others to do, but rarely did for his own sake. "You're happy, Steve?" Sam asks quietly. Steve's face lights up with a serenity and quiet joy. "It's been beautiful." We then get a final glimpse into what Steve did. After returning the stones, he took the opportunity to go back to the late 1940s, to reunite with Peggy Carter. He lived a life with her in an alternate timeline, marrying the love of his life, finally getting that dance, and all the time together that they were denied. It's a life of small, tender moments rather than superheroics, and Steve clearly cherishes every memory of it. As a final coda, we see in our mind's eye, or on screen, If this were film, a cozy living room of a suburban home in the late 1940s or early 1950s, there's a record playing a gentle jazz tune on a phonograph. Through a window, late afternoon sunlight streams in, illuminating dust motes in the air. On a small dance floor, perhaps just a cleared space in the living room, Steve Rogers, looking young and handsome again, in a crisp white shirt with suspenders, and Peggy Carter, radiant in a simple dress, her hair done in curls, sways slowly, wrapped in each other's arms. There's no audience, no war, no urgency, just the two of them finally sharing their dance. Peggy rests her head on Steve's shoulder, eyes closed, a contented smile on her lips. Steve holds her close, eyes shut as well, gently humming along to the music. They turn slowly, lost in each other. The camera, so to speak, might pan to their clasped hands, Peggy's engagement and wedding ring catching the light, Steve's hand steady and strong around hers. Their feet shuffle softly on the rug. It's not a fancy dance, just a heartfelt one. As the music drifts and the image fades, we see Steve lean in to kiss Peggy tenderly. Back in the present, old Steve gazes at the horizon, as if reminiscing about that very dance. Sam sits with him, and Bucky stands a little ways off, giving a moment of privacy but present. The air is calm, the future uncertain but hopeful. Steve Rogers, after a lifetime of service and sacrifice, has found peace. His story, from the scrawny kid in Brooklyn to the legendary Captain America, and back to a man who chose love and a quiet life, has come full circle. And as nightfall gently begins, one can imagine that somewhere, somehow, the spirit of that boy from Brooklyn is finally at rest, having earned the long and joyous life he lived in those final chapters. The camera of our mind pulls back from the scene by the lake, Sam holding the shield thoughtfully, old Steve at ease, and as twilight deepens, we end on a feeling of warmth and closure. Steve Rogers' journey through the ages, through war and turmoil, through loss and friendship, concludes not with a clash of titans, but with a simple dance and a life well lived. It's a soft, tender epilogue to a grand saga, the kind of ending that assures us that even the greatest heroes deserve and can find their slice of personal happiness. And so, in the quiet of that lakeside evening, Steve Rogers' story in the MCU gently comes to a close. The torch is passed, the shield is in good hands, and Steve's watch has ended. He can finally rest, a good man who never sought greatness, but achieved it through his humility, bravery, and love. His legacy will live on in the hearts of those he inspired, from Sam Wilson carrying the shield forward, to every person who remembers the man who just didn't like bullies and stood up for what was right, no matter the cost. As you drift to sleep, you can imagine Steve and Peggy dancing slowly in their living room to the sounds of a timeless tune, a dance that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The world is safe tonight, and our captain has earned his sweet dream. The end.